And I said, Lord, lead me to somebody today that I can share Jesus with at the dog park. Because each church is different, then what I encourage them to do is to work out,
Wow.
and I saw her baptism just 2 weeks ago.
Oh, wow. Praise the Lord.
So it's amazing how the Lord works. If you go out.
Welcome, Dr. Neale Schofield. Glad you can join me.
Pleasure.
Neale, how can churches be relevant? You've got a lot of experience from a market. You've served in senior marketing roles. Mm-hmm. You've served in ministry and media. Mm-hmm. I'd love to see what your insights are about churches being relevant to their communities.
Okay. Well, I don't really profess to be an expert, but I'll just share a few things, Tim. I think the first thing would be is to offer something that people want or need. That's the first thing. And to be effectively relevant also, it's good. Well, it's ideal if you're good at it, whatever you're offering.
Sure.
If it's an area of your specialty or expertise, and so what you're offering is works. And thirdly, I'd say the ideal would be to offer something that other people are not offering. So it's unique. You're offering something special. And maybe I'll give you an example.
Yeah, do that.
There's no one right or wrong way, by the way. In terms of being relevant to the community and offering service to the community that they want or need, there's so many different needs out there that if you are helping people, then it's a wonderful thing. But there's also the perspective of what is the most efficient or effective way. We can't do everything. So as an example, there are a lot of op shops. The church operates a number of op shops, which is good.
Yeah.
They do a tremendous service. But just say in my local community, there are 4 or 5 op shops, which there are. And if our local church then offered another op shop, there's a sense in which, well, does the community need another op shop?
Yeah.
And I compare that with one fellow that I remember who used to grow vegetables, actually over at the Sydney Adventist Hospital.
Sure.
And for the patients. But he would take the vegetables that were left over, and then he would visit the widows and the needy, and he would come with boxes of vegetables and saying, look, I just thought that that you might like some of these vegetables. And the impact it had on people from the community, where he was offering something that people need, that he's good at, and others weren't offering, is quite special, I think. So
No, and I love that example because, there are people who are desperate for food or supplies, and especially in our economic times at the moment where there's high interest rates and difficulty in people finding places to live in.
Yes.
There's desperate needs.
Yeah.
And so I hear what you're saying is being relevant to people's needs.
Yeah, and I think also, Tim, it reminds us that how important the personal touch is.
Yeah.
Sometimes we can put to the front a corporate approach.
Sure.
To meeting community needs. That is, the church does it.
Yeah.
But there's something special about each church member doing so in their local community. And I'll just, to illustrate, we have a neighbour who has quite a few needs, and my wife in particular helps her out on a range of different areas, community need, personal needs. And this lady said to Coralie, my wife, the other day, she said, you and Neale are so kind that whenever I meet another kind person, I think, you must be a Seventh-day Adventist. And when I heard that, by the way, it's my wife a lot more than me, but when I heard that, I thought, well, what a lovely thing to say. And the importance of being kind, caring for people, building that trust, and just helping people.
helping them, being friends to people.
Yeah.
I love that notion. So let's say someone's watching
Yes.
and they're saying, I feel that I'm not relevant or my church is not being relevant to the community. We want to find out what our community needs. We
Yes.
don't want to be another shop of one type if they already exist, or we don't want to provide a service if there's a glut of that.
Yes.
How does someone find out then what their community needs?
Yeah. Well, there's a range of different avenues to discovering the needs. One is just to find out what information on the community is already out there. It's published. So whether it be existing research reports from researchers such as McCrindle, or even I've gone on to local council websites, and they list everything from the demographics of their community, suburb by suburb, and the incidence of domestic violence and abuse, and you start to get a look at what some of the needs of your community happens to be. And so that's one way. I'm a part of a community Facebook page. So I live in Pymble, so I'm part of my wife and I are part of the community of Pymble. And it's interesting to see what on the Facebook group people are saying they're looking for. And it's everything from tips on health to dog care. That's quite a big one.
Okay, dog care.
Security. And so you get to see what is important to the community from this community page. I'd love us to do, as a church, Tim, to do a lot more qualitative research groups.
Okay, tell me, what is qualitative research?
Yeah, so instead of just going out doing surveys,
Sure.
where people often fill out the surveys on what they think you want them to say,
Sure.
you actually get people from the community into a room and you have expert facilitators, researchers, who are able to ask the right questions to continue to dig to find the real issues and discover the real needs of a community, not just the symptoms or what people think you are wanting to say.
And so the benefit then is if you've got a group together, you can ask them questions and then you can ask them to clarify, why did you say that or why do you think that? So you can dig a little bit deeper.
That's it.
In understanding the motives.
That's it. And also I think, Tim, just even if you meet together as a congregation and you say, look, we want to meet this afternoon to discuss what our community needs are, and have each person share what their view is on what their community needs are, I think we'd be surprised just how accurate we could be.
And that's a nice idea too, because you're engaging your church community in seeking their input.
Yes.
And they know people who live next to them or in their community, their street.
Yes.
And so hopefully, sharing their reflection, their observations.
Yeah, that's it.
And what you were saying before, that just makes so much sense about go to your local Facebook page, your community Facebook page or a website or whatever it might be, because people do express their concerns or ask questions or, seeking help on different things. So it's such a great go-to. I like that suggestion. Very good. And so there are the free avenues like you talked about.
Yes.
You can conduct research.
Yes.
You can employ an experienced researcher or perhaps someone in your church has some competencies in this space.
Yes.
Once you start to get a bit of a picture of what the needs are in the community, so you've listened, you've observed, you've talked to people, you might have done surveys, you might have done some focus groups, and you start to get a bit of a list of ideas.
Yeah.
How do you distill then what you should do as an individual or what you should do as a collective church community?
Yeah, okay. That's a good question. Just sort of pulling back before we explore that area, Tim, I think another thing to consider is that sometimes there is a community need that those in the community may not tell us is a need. In fact, may downright reject it. So, for instance, it's at least my perspective, and I'm sure it's yours too, that the greatest need in every community is the presence and power of Jesus.
Absolutely.
To have Jesus in your life, for Jesus to be your Saviour, to be Lord of your life. And so when we talk with people, they may share symptoms of not having Jesus, issues such as maybe lack of purpose, or not being able to forgive somebody, or struggling with temper, and all sorts of areas that Jesus is actually the solution, or he's actually the need. And when they have Jesus, they have hope and they have purpose and all these other areas. So I think it's important for us, number one,
Yes.
as local congregations, to ensure that we realise that the greatest need is to share Jesus.
Yes.
And to show Jesus. I think Spurgeon said people don't read Bibles, they read people, or something like that. And to demonstrate Jesus in your life is vital.
Neale, I've recently done some research with church members, and one of the barriers they shared to sharing their faith was, I don't want to be pushy.
Yeah.
And I can relate to that. You know, I want to share Jesus, but sometimes we're not quite sure how to do it, or what the right time is, or not to be pushy about it.
Yes.
And I think some of the things you've been saying so far just help answer that question. You talked about that example of a man delivering a box of fruit and veggies and meeting people's needs, having the opportunity then to have a conversation and seeing what questions might come up, or hearing their story. But do you have any advice, you know, about, okay, so we've got to share Jesus.
Yeah.
You know, it's a really important need. The world's hungry.
Yes.
And they're desperate for what Jesus can offer.
Yeah.
But how do we do that in a way that's not pushy?
Well, you establish a friendship, establish a connection. I'll give you an example of something that happened to me just a little while back. I mentioned about our community and the need for dog care. And, you know, dogs are a love of my life. And so we would take our dog from time to dog parks. Now, what I've noticed at dog parks is that the barriers are down. If you meet somebody in the street, they don't want to talk to you, or very few want to talk to you. They've got things to do. But if you go to a dog park and you've got your dog and they've got their dog, there's an instant connection, and you can get chatting. So I can remember, I prayed. I said, Lord, lead me to somebody today that I can share Jesus with at the dog park. So I went to the dog park and I met up with a fellow and started to talk. And we spoke for about an hour. And very openly, you know, once we got talking, you know, what do you do, and you know how it all works, and you start connecting. And he was enthralled by you know, Coralie and I living in Germany and Scotland and all the rest of it. And then he invited me over to his place just the other day, and we all then started to talk. We found another connection in that he's right into tractors, getting old tractors. Now, my family, my uncle does the same thing, and so we started to talk about that, and over time he started to open up about some of the challenges in his life. And I asked him, can I pray for you for those challenges? He said, I'd love you to. Now, we had a meal together. Now, we have a connection now that can go forward. So it's not that hard, really. No. You pray and don't be pushy. You don't need to be pushy.
No.
You just establish a friendship and go from there.
And that's interesting, isn't it? You intentionally, though, you're somewhere, you prayed for God to lead you to somebody.
Yes.
And then you had a common bond of dogs and tractors and other things like that.
Yeah, which may seem quite obscure.
Yeah.
But that's how the Lord works.
And so be involved in your community.
Absolutely.
Be friends.
Yes.
Have a meal with your neighbour.
Yes.
All great ways.
Yeah. But just getting back to your question that I diverted from.
Sure.
What should local congregations do if they've got a list?
Yeah.
And I'll give you a few examples from the work
Sure.
that I'm doing in South Australia.
Okay.
So working with local churches on really how to meet their community needs and how to grow the church. And once again, because each church is different, then what I encourage them to do is to understand what the DNA is of their church. So I'll give you one example.
Sure.
I'll give you three examples. First one is Brighton Church on the seaside in Adelaide.
Okay.
And as they started to talk about this, what makes Brighton Brighton? And how can we match a need in our community that best fits with what we're good at? They realised that Faith FM, the radio station, they have presenters from Brighton on Faith FM, and these presenters said that the people in our community who want to make contact with us are the type of people who are really looking for a Bible-based church. They are tired of their local church that either says the Bible is cannot be trusted. Did Jesus rise from the dead? Is the Old Testament true? Did Jesus really create the world? And when they hear Faith FM, they say, right, there's a people who has meeting a need that I'm looking for. So Brighton said, and they're now putting this over all of their brochures and their website and so on, they say that we are the home of biblical truth.
Wow, that's so clear, isn't it, what they stand for?
And so they're saying for Western Adelaide, we are the home of biblical truth. So they've said that's a need that we believe we can meet. So what they're doing is that they're turning their worship services into community-based worship services.
Okay.
Instead of using Adventist language and, often you'll go to a church, you'll turn up, you don't know who the speaker is, you don't know what the subject is.
No.
Well, they've created a calendar with series, and these series are all different and they reach different people in the community. So
Great.
they've asked me to take a series, and I have this is well publicised. It's on Facebook, it's on Faith FM,
Sure.
and brochures such as this. So this is a series I'm running in a couple of months called Mysteries of the Louvre. And because my background is in the world of art, I'm running this 3-part series on Mysteries of the Louvre. Now, the church members can then invite their friends, their neighbours, people who are interested in the art world to come and hear this.
Great.
And so they're now really focusing on how they can meet the needs of the community. That's one church.
And I like the idea, though, that there's a program so you know what you're inviting your friend to.
That's it.
You can match their interests with what's being presented.
Yeah. The second church is Grace Adventist Centre, and they've said, well, the community need that we want to meet is the looking at the overseas students who come to Adelaide, to university in Adelaide, but they don't know anyone. They've got no family. So they said, okay, we're going to offer you ourselves as your family and friends and social network. And so they are meeting that need through care groups and really establishing that connection. And it was so beautiful. I was there the other day and I was in a Sabbath school class, and here are all these people opening their Bibles for the first time.
Wow.
Because they've come from overseas. Most of them were not Christians. And so here is a church that said, that's the need we're going to meet, and we're going to base our church around meeting that specific need. And because a number of them were also overseas students previously, the church members, then they know how to meet the need.
Wow. So the DNA of the church is hospitality, friendship.
Absolutely.
And they came to that conclusion.
Young people, young professionals, it's just a perfect fit.
And they understood that too, because some of them had been in that position where you're in a foreign land, no one knows you, risk of isolation, meeting a real need.
Yes.
That's great.
And then the third example is Faith Adventist Centre. Now, what they do, they meet in a community hall, and they're in a fairly lower socioeconomic area. They know their community. And so they have the worship service in the morning, and then they have lunch. but they don't call it a church lunch. It's a community lunch. And then in the afternoon they have a food pantry. And so I've been there, they line up all the food, and a whole, young people in particular, because there's a university nearby, they come and they take their food, but then they start wanting to talk to people. Why are you offering this food?
Right.
Tell me about yourselves. And I remember seeing here as the pastor talking about 4 or 5 people who had come for this food. And if they come early enough, they see the church members having the community lunch. They say, what's that? And they say, well, that's a free community lunch. Come. So they come to that. And then if they're early enough for the lunch, they see the church services going. So it's working backwards.
Yeah.
People are coming for the food pantry.
Yes.
Then they're coming for the community lunch. And they see how special the people are. And then they're coming now for the Sabbath school and church program. And it's a beautiful way of meeting, well, the needs of their community.
And again, it comes back to some people who have got that fear of, I don't want to be pushy. Yeah. That's not pushy.
No, not at all.
You're meeting their needs.
Yeah.
And they then see something that looks attractive,
yes,
and they want to be part of it too.
Yeah.
So they're great examples, Neale, and very different examples.
Indeed.
And let's hope that those examples can be inspiration to somebody who's watching too,
yes,
wondering, how do we as our church be effective and meet the needs of the community?
Yeah.
Like you say, different service, be relevant.
Yes.
Something that meets our DNA, the
yes,
things that we're good at doing.
Yes.
That's great. Neale, can you tell me then, let's say, what are the complexities though of making things happen? And you've run some big projects. I've worked with you in our corporate life, and you've operated some big projects, big teams of people. But, churches are different to businesses. You're relying on volunteers and people are busy and they don't always have time to do stuff. How do you make some of these things happen? Now, I know putting on a lunch,
yes,
that's not complex.
Yes.
That's not difficult, really.
Yes.
But some things do require coordination. Your series at the Louvre,
yes,
that takes some effort. Marketing, printing the brochures, designing the brochures. How do you make those things happen?
I think, Tim, when people start seeing results, they get involved, and involvement brings commitment. And you're right, it's very different to the business world. In the business world, if you're the boss, you can say, this is the way we're going to do it, right, let's all get on board. But in the local churches, the last thing you want to do is tell people what to do. And it needs to be their ideas, and allow your church members to meet community needs in their way. And I'll give you an example of a church I preached at just a couple of weeks ago. They decided to have an Ask an Expert day. So they set up they're right in the middle of, their church is right in the heart of the community. So it's a very public area. And they set up their car space with gazebos. And so they said, they had an electrician there, one of their church members, ask an electrician, ask a doctor, ask a mechanic, ask a vet. And so whatever your skills may happen to be, then people from the community could come and ask you questions. Now, what I was particularly interested in is that there was one member there who thought, well, I don't really have anything special to offer. So he said, but he thought, I'm not going to be stopped by that. Everyone else is involved. I'm going to get involved. So he set up his own gazebo and he got his guitar, because he can play the guitar very well. And he started playing his guitar, and instead of having a sign that said, ask a mechanic or whatever it happens to be, his sign simply said, let's talk. That's it.
Right.
And he just started to play his guitar, and this sign said, let's talk. A lady came to him and wanted to talk. Now, it ended up that this lady was once a Seventh-day Adventist, and she came, and after 20 or 30 years, she came and she saw what was happening at the local church and how they were meeting community needs. And she started to talk with this fellow.
Wow.
And I saw her baptism just 2 weeks ago.
Oh, wow. Praise the Lord.
So it's amazing how the Lord works. If you go out and you allow people to serve the community in their skin, then how the Lord can work in an amazing way.
And that's such a great example that we can all talk. We can all be friends. You don't have to have special skills at the end of the day.
Yes.
I read, they talk about the epidemic that's happening at the moment is the loneliness epidemic, people feeling isolated and lonely. Even though we've never been so connected with social media, people still crave that human engagement.
Yeah.
And that's something we can all do.
Yes.
That's great. So, Neale, if I take a step back, and you've provided some really good examples,
Yes.
what are some of the trends or things you see in innovation that's happening in the church world
Yes.
that people need to be aware of? What are some of the things that are happening that churches can tap into, take advantage of?
Yeah. Tim, I think that there may be a move away from the corporate approach of, here is a church putting on an event. So perhaps less events and more of a fragmented or personal approach. I think home churches will continue to grow, and so church members will be able to have a more relaxed, personal, less formal environment to eating together, spend time together, building trust, getting to know people, and meeting their needs personally.
Okay.
And I think that will be one that's something that is happening and will continue to.
Great.
And also online, which obviously is something very important to you and your ministry. And both online churches, I think online churches are going to be extremely important and grow, but also online ministries, particularly to those who may not feel like attending a church or attending an event.
Sure.
Maybe they've been hurt, maybe they're shy, and they'd love somebody to pray for them, pray with them,
Great.
to talk to,
Yes.
even to study the Bible with, but in not such having a digital approach to start with at least. So there's a couple of trends anyway.
And particularly if I can comment on two of those trends, Neale, there's an interview that we've got coming up soon that talks about how people can use social media to find people who need prayers, who want prayer support.
Lovely.
So I'd encourage our viewers, if that's interested, check out our YouTube channel.
Great.
And they'll see that.
Yes.
But also, Neale, we've got a conversation coming up, and I'd encourage people to watch this video about you and some of the media that you've done.
Yes.
Very creative use of media, creative use of storytelling to share spiritual truths. So I encourage people to watch out for that video on the Ministry Innovation social media channels too. Thank you so much, Neale. May God continue to bless your work in ministry. I appreciate your time today.
Thank you, Tim.